I mentioned a second ago, the design side and the build side, they all have different things they want to use a BIM model for. Like for the construction manager may want to have a BIM model and attach schedule data that they're responsible to the different elements, so they can have a 4D model that can then show where the building is at any given time in the project. The MEP subtrades may want to, they take into account how they're going to, what's going to go in first, the pipe or the duct, and how that's going to be arranged. The constructability plays into that. The design team isn't as concerned about that. We're all doing a different BIM model for a different purpose, but we're not doing it all together yet. So I think if you can cut that waste out and you can just have one BIM model from the start, I think that's where there's a lot of potential for savings of schedule, savings of time, because you're not recreating things. You're not waiting to hand something off and have somebody else recreate it. If you can get rid of all that waste, there's a lot of room for reduced schedules, for more accuracy, for loss of or less loss of understanding when you're handing over a set of drawings. If you give a model with more information, it gives more information to the build team.
So how does it work right now? Is it sequential? Like every team, I mean, it would start with the structural and then it move to the, let's say, mechanical and so on and so forth. A BIM model would move from one state to the other, or no, each one of them would go and develop their own BIM model based on what they care about.
Yeah, I mean, on the design side, we're responsible to put out a set of drawings. The drawings are what the contract is based on. It's what permitting is done based on. It's what the contractor's looking for is a set of drawings. So that's what it's been the common practice forever. We've just gone from using hand-drawn drawings to computer-aided drawings to now a BIM model that produces a set of drawings. The model's not being handed over and the design team's not standing behind the accuracy of it because there's liability there. And I think we have to overcome that to be able to really hand that off and truly let the rest of the team build off of that. Because typically we'll hand over drawings and then the subcontractors will create their own models for what they want to use it for. So it is very sequential, and it's not all done at the same time.
While high fidelity BIM models would just bring everyone to the same room and have one particular model instead?
Not necessarily one, but I think it's not having to recreate what you already had. I think you're still going to have different trades that have their own models, and we're now using environments like Navisworks to bring all the models into one big model so that you can look around, see where the conflicts are, and everybody can make adjustments to their model. So we're getting there, but I think the true benefit's going to come when you can just take one model and hand it off and use a design model that started off at the beginning of the project, and you end up with a version of that model that you can cut steel members with. That's where I think you're going to get a lot more value.
Does that have a role, in facilitating sustainable material choices and tracking embodied carbon?
Very much so, because if you have a high quality model, if you know exactly what the quantities of all the elements are in your model, you're able to do a lot more with that data. And we're doing that with embodied carbon also. If we know not just what that beam size is, but we know what kind of concrete it's made with, we know what the mix design is, we know how much cement went into that, we know what the embodied carbon of that cement was, how far it was trucked in. Once you can embed all that kind of information into a model, now you can start to see what your embodied carbon of the whole building is and make choices to help reduce that embodied carbon. So maybe you change it, you can easily change a mix design of a concrete mix design, change the cement content, change where it's sourced from, and immediately see how that decision impacts the embodied carbon in the building.
Interesting. So you have a role in design build market as a leader, and your approach is all around delivering LOD 400 models, as you guys call it, LOD 400 models.
LOD 400, yep.
Can you talk us a little bit more about this?
That's kind of gray in that area between just handing over drawings and handing over a model. LOD 400 is what a fabricator will use to cut steel or to order rebar from. And what we're doing is we're taking our design side model and doing the extra effort, taking whatever effort the subcontractor might do to recreate that model. We're bringing it up to the design side, taking our initial design model, taking that all the way to LOD 400, that higher fidelity, and handing that over to the contractor to go cut steel off of. So that's where we can save a lot of time, and we can be a lot more accurate with the information we turn over.
Does that enhance collaboration as well with the design builders?
Very much so. Yeah.
It impacts. I'm assuming it impacts the critical path for the product in general.
It definitely does, and it allows us. Not all the time, but a lot of the time, and we can look at compressing schedules. It depends on how much risk the team wants to take. If they want to order steel when the building has only been 30% designed, that means the structural design is 100% designed before the architecture is done and the mechanical engineer is done, and the facade has been figured out. There's risk there. So how much time we save and how early that happens, that's up to the project team to figure out how much risk the team wants to take.
What is the adoption rate of BIM? I'm just wondering, and does it differ between large and smaller companies?
I think for building projects, BIM has been 100% adopted. I think for the most part, let me back it up. I'll say about 95% adopted. I think there's probably still a few small firms that do houses and things like that aren't living in that world yet. But I think most firms that do decent sized buildings, commercial buildings, they have to be able to navigate around in BIM at this point, or they're not going to be competitive and they're probably out of business. Now, how far they're going to go with that BIM model, that's where there's a lot of variation. And a lot of the bigger, more savvy firms like ours, we're really pushing the boundaries with BIM and how AI plays into that, and how material harvesting, data harvesting, how all that plays into our BIM model. That's stuff that we're playing around with to figure out how we can make the construction industry even better than it is right now.
Speaking of sustainable material choices, how far have we come in actually making this a priority when putting these BIM models?
It depends on the owner.
So it's still down to the owner, right?
Very much so. I mean, because there's usually a cost associated with it. So
is it more or less? Is it more expensive?
Not necessarily. It's just a choice in some cases. And a lot of times, we'll write our specs around just the environmentally friendly choice. What we might use a concrete sealer that's got low VOC content, or something there's choices we can make that are no cost that we build into what we design these days. But there's other things that do have a cost associated with it. So it's really down to the owner being on what their goals are. Do they really want to have a low energy building? Then they need to be part of the decision making and help the design team get to that choice and make sure that the costs are understood and baked into that design choice.
What is the adoption rate right now? As a percentage of the total buildings that you guys work on, how many of them have owners pushing towards sustainable material choices versus not really caring?
I don't think anybody not really cares anymore. I think there's still everybody passively cares, but it's how aggressive do you want to be with that? Mm-hmm. Do you want a LEED platinum building? Is LEED silver enough? Do you not really care about getting a certification at all? Do you just want to make smart choices? Is it growing? I think it's growing. I think I think the industry itself is naturally moving that direction. And there's a number of coalitions like SC 2050 that where structural engineers have committed to having low embodied carbon in their buildings by the year 2050, or carbon neutral buildings by the year 2050. There's a lot of associations like that owners that are impressive to some owners. So I think the industry is getting there faster than owners are saying we have to have this.
Do you know how we compare it to other developed markets when it comes to this particular path?
With respect to sustainability and material choices?
Yes, material choices, sustainability, how clean our buildings are.
I think buildings are definitely one of the most carbon intensive things that humanity does is build buildings. And it's not just the operation, it's how much carbon goes into building the buildings. I think there's still going to be, it's hard to make that decision on every building type. Like for a manufacturing building that uses chemicals, if you're manufacturing microchips, you have to use chemicals, and you have to have certain energy requirements. There's only so much you can cut back on. With other buildings, like with residential or office buildings, there you can make a lot more sustainable minded choices, because you can think about the baseline's it's a lot different. close
I'm
enough.
just wondering if we're leading or lagging on that particular front in comparison to other countries and markets. Uh,
I think with other countries, I think especially in Europe, I mean, it's more anecdotal than anything else. I think we're probably a little bit behind some countries in Europe that have really made it a government effort to step up sustainability goals. The United States is a lot more varied, more it's the market in upstate New York might be very, very different from the market in Idaho, and the political climate is obviously very different, and that plays into whether the government has regulations around that or not. So I think I don't know. I think we're better than some. We're worse than some. I wouldn't say we're leading on the leading edge or on the trailing edge either way.
That's a really an interesting point to make, because we're definitely pushing towards the EV, and when it comes to transportation, we're just taking huge steps and introducing legislations in different states on how we're going to become totally EV in sales, at least, and in adoption, and as little as 15, 20 years from now. But then when it comes to building and infrastructure build and structures, you don't see the same push. You don't hear about it. While I don't have the numbers, but I'm guessing that probably the amount of carbon and carbon footprint of the building industry is probably equivalent, or maybe, I don't know, just guessing, to transportation. I could be very wrong or odd or off, but then I'm assuming that also, as you were saying, just building a building takes a lot of, has a heavy toll on the environment in terms of how much carbon goes in and out.
I think the comment you made about transportation being the industry changing, I think it's very similar to what's happening in the building industry. It's not the entire industry; it's the states. So California may require, no gas-powered cars by 2050. I forget what the number is they came up with.
I think 2030.
2030, right. Well, they also had they were the first ones to adopt the International Green Building Code, which had high energy efficiency goals. That's pushed changes in the code in other states too. So I think it's the same thing. You've got certain states that have a progressive way of looking at things from a sustainability standard, and they're pushing the way for the rest of the industry. The same thing in the building industry. I think there's certain states that are pushing the edge and being more sustainable, and the others are not jumping to catch up, but they're going to slowly catch up eventually, no matter what.
I have a question. I know that we're running out of time, but this question is on my head.
Sure.
And I always wondered, some states are more prone to storms, to weather catastrophes, disasters, so on and so forth. But then I kind of feel that sometimes the legislation, the regulations, the guidelines in these states are not in line with the condition of the state, being on a specific location that continuously get hit by fires, let's say in California where I live, or by storms and hurricanes like in Florida where you live. We still build houses made of wood on the road, on the same route that usually storms and hurricanes hit year after year, or every couple of years, few years. Same thing in California. We don't feel that the nature and type of buildings that we're building, specifically in endangered areas and prone to wildfires, are changing from a regulation or from a standpoint. So what's your thoughts on this? How come? Why?
I think we as humans are still trying to figure that out, and we screw up and we get better. And so with fires, for instance, California, we build into the forests and we stop small forest fires before they can get out of control. But now we've got 20 years of undergrowth that's built up that when a fire does happen, it becomes a raging inferno and destroys everything. And we're getting, from what I've understood, we're getting better at forestry management, understanding that controlled burns are going to help have a healthy forest and not have these raging wildfires. Similar in Florida, development on the coast on these barrier islands that are just basically sandbars in the ocean that shift with every storm that comes by, allowing developers to build houses on there on barrier islands and on really close to the coast where they tear down mangroves and build beachfront property. Those are the properties that we shouldn't be building there. We shouldn't be allowing developers to build there, because part of nature is hurricanes coming through and moving the landscape around in Florida. We're having mangrove swamps to help soften the storms and the storm surge coming inland and hitting development.
But why not building concrete homes or houses?
You can build a wood house fine if you're mitigating the effects that are problems. One of the lessons from Hurricane Ian, which I don't know if you paid attention to the news in Florida last year, probably the most expensive hurricane from a property law standpoint in history, completely wiped out a number of developments on the coast. But inland, about 10 miles, there was a development that was built. It's called the Babcock Ranch development that was specifically designed to withstand a direct hit from a storm. But they designed flood mitigation measures. They designed the houses above the floodplain. They designed all the utilities and electrical systems not to lose power. They have solar farms that are feeding it so they don't run off the grid. And they didn't lose power during the storm, even though they were directly hit by it. So it's a matter of learning from the disasters, learning what not to do, and then intentionally building things the way that are going to be resilient for the future. And I think we're learning that in Florida here too.
Interesting. So I think you had some work or observations about engineering licensure in Turkey.
You've been reading all my president's messages. Yeah.
Well,
I'd
like to hear more about this. So,
I mean, all I know is from that's what I read in the media, obviously. But with any structural failure, anything bad happens in your industry, you're all obsessed with it and figuring out why and figuring out how to be better. And with Turkey, my understanding is there's no licensure process. You get out of college and it's fairly easy to become a civil engineer or an engineer who's designing buildings. And in Florida and in all the U.S. 50 states, in addition to education, you have to have a formal apprenticeship and licensure process. It takes 4 years, and you have to take an exam to become a licensed professional. That's an extra step. And there's been talk about deregulation of engineering in other industries in Florida and other states. And I think that looking at Turkey, looking at a country that had massive, forget whatever corruption issues were there. I'm sure there was some of that. There was a lot of politics involved, I believe, also. But at a core level, you need to have qualified professionals to build the buildings that keep people safe. And I think that's an easy regulation. Those kinds of regulations are smart, and you need to keep them in place. And that was really the point of my argument that bringing up Turkey as we look to changes that we're going to allow Florida lawmakers to make. Let's keep in mind what happens when you're not regulated and you don't have to have this rigorous vetting process.
Makes sense. What do you see the major pressing design and construction challenges facing the engineering community today?
It's not technical. It goes into the design build part. It's the changing landscape of trying to build things faster, cheaper, and better, but not changing our fees, not doing things really any different than we have been. Those two things aren't going to necessarily go together. If you want to go faster, cheaper, bigger, more complicated, more complex, especially with a changing environment, you've got to do things a little bit differently, and you've got to start pushing the envelope and be willing to take some risks to do that. And that's where I think some companies on the build side and the design side are trying some different things out. And it's just going to be a matter of which ones work to figure out how we get to what we're going to look like in 30 years as an industry.
I think the cheaper is the part that is very challenging here. Faster, better, I understand, but cheaper at the same time, the mix is just not right.
And cheaper is the one we have the least control over, because we can't control the lumber market or the steel market or the concrete market. That's the stuff that it's so hard to control that all you can do is monitor it and try to hit it right.
What is the most impactful element when you're calculating the costs of your project? What is the major factor that usually blows up the whole thing? Is it the material cost or the human resources or contractors wanting to make bigger margins? Or
very often it's the material cost.
Cost.
Yeah, with a building design fees are very, very often less than 10% of the entire project.
Why does this seem to be a lesser problem in other countries and markets? Because honestly, I got to tell you this. You walk into restaurants here, you walk into hotels, you walk into buildings that are 10, 15 years old, and you feel like they're old. The tables are old, the ceiling, the floor, everything is it seems overly used, super old. We're very light on designs and decorations, on lighting fixtures and structures. And I could keep going and going here, right? And then you wonder, and I always ask myself, how come? How come? What's wrong with these guys? Is it them going cheap, or is it because the material is so costly that you can't afford to have lowered ceiling, hidden lights and integrated within the ceiling, beautiful floors, better looking structure, especially in hotels and restaurants and commodity and kind of touristic attractions? What's the problem? We don't import enough from China, or what's going on here?
I don't know that there's one solution to that, or there's one problem for that. I mean, I know that finishes, the things that you see in a building, are the last things that get put in, and they're the last things that get bought. So if the project is over budget and they're looking to cut costs late in the project, that's what they're going to cut costs on. So there's probably some of that going on. If it's an older building, I know renovation costs, once a building gets built and turned over, how many owners down the line are you when you walk into a building, and do they have an incentive to update everything and make it look modern, make it look better? Are they trying to attract tenants or restaurant patrons, or what's the incentive to make it look good? So I don't know. There's probably 100 different reasons why we had that different mindset on things, but cost is very often a big part of it.
You have more advanced regulations or laws into when importing products from outside, the quality of the products and that goes into the country versus other countries. Could that be the reason that we're just so selective in sourcing the material from other markets, that it has to be really premium, and then that makes the cost really high?
I don't know. I don't know if I can weigh in too much on that. I'm not that familiar with that part of it. I mean, from my perspective, we're on the structural side of things. We're really in control of the concrete, steel, and lumber and things like that. And it's pretty much regionally sourced, unless you're talking about large steel shapes for big complex shapes that maybe we don't make them in the States anymore and we have to import them from Canada or China. For the most part, we try to be regional. And that's, again, back to baking sustainability into building design. We try to do regional materials as best we can so that we're not trucking things or shipping things from China or somewhere else that's going to add to the embodied carbon of something.
What's next for Scott? My last question for you.
That's a good one. I'm looking forward to continuing to figure out what this role is. I took over as our director of design build or our design build market leader about a year and a half ago, and it's a new role for us at the company. And there are a lot of big companies in our industry have similar roles, but they're all a little bit different. But it's all in reaction to the same thing. We're all trying to figure out how to do alternative delivery projects differently, or react to this environment of building faster, cheaper, more integrated. For me, it's figuring out what this role is for me and what I can do for the company and how I can make Walter be more and more competitive and a better design build partner to design and build projects with. So I'm looking forward to exploring that more and seeing how far we can go with it.
Well, best of luck then, Scott. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
You too,
I sincerely thank you for all your valuable insights and expertise in the engineering world, and wish you best of luck whatever comes next.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day now. Thank you, Scott.
You too.